What is up, guys? Fadeaway82 coming at you with a weekly Rust update video. We're going to go ahead and get right into it because there's a lot of stuff to cover and it's an exciting update. Right off the bat, you can see that I'm holding a new melee weapon called a Bone Club. It's a default blueprint. It's going to run you 20 bone fragments and you can craft it right from the get-go. As far as its effectiveness, it's fun to use and it's got a cool graphic to it. It's a femur bone that has some blood splatter on it and it's really cool stuff. In addition, a new piece of headgear has been added into the game. It's called a Riot helmet. It's a makeshift Riot helmet, great for deflecting against melee attacks. Not super effective against bullet damage, but it does help with the melee damage, and it is not a default blueprint, so if you want to wear this bad boy, you're going to have to go ahead and hit some barrels and find the blueprint for that. It's going to be something that is going to run you 30 cloth and 50 metal fragments, so it's not super expensive, but it's going to be effective. The most exciting aspect of this week's patch, though, guys, that we want to talk about is landmines. Landmines have been added into the game. You can see that I have it here in my hotbar, and I've gone ahead and I've added it into the ground. In terms of the landmine, it's not going to be a default blueprint, and what it's going to run you is going to be 75 metal fragments and 125 gunpowder. So they're not super expensive, and they're very effective for base defenses. Now you'll see that my guy's pretty well armored here, and I'm at 100 health right now. I'm going to go ahead and step on a landmine, and we're going to go ahead and see what damage that does. The damage appears to be a little bit variable, so it depends on certain things, and I've gone down from 100 health to 16 health. I'm not wounded, I'm not bleeding, but I have lost a substantial amount of health. Now, we've done some testing with it, and sometimes it will kill you instantly, other times it will do what seems like fairly consistent damage, so it's a little bit hard to figure out, but it's something that is going to damage you greatly if you step on it. Notice when we stepped on the landmine that it did not trigger the other landmines next to it. That's not to say, however, that it doesn't have a blast radius. Other players, if they're around you, will receive damage, but that landmine will not trigger other landmines, so they don't seem to be affected by one another, even when they're placed right on top of each other. Perhaps the biggest question on the mind of players is, can you place landmines inside of a building blocked area? Is it like ladders, and can you put it inside of a building allowed or building blocked area? The question is, if the building's blocked, you cannot place the landmine. You'll notice it appears blue, but we can't place it when building's blocked. If you go ahead and authorize on the cabinet, we can then place that landmine. So that's something that you want to be aware of. You can't use it to necessarily grief people. I'm glad they did it that way, so you're not going to wake up to a million landmines in front of your house unless they have access to your cabinet. But speaking of houses, the question is, can you place landmines on foundations? Can you use them inside the base? And absolutely you can do that. If you have building privilege in the area, you can go ahead and you can place landmines on foundations. In terms of how this works, you want to be aware that there is a bit of a blast radius to the landmines. So if somebody steps on a landmine in your house, it's not like C4 is right now in the game in that it will only damage that particular block. It actually has a blast radius similar to the way that C4 used to be. Let's go ahead and run over this landmine and we'll go ahead and test it. And you'll notice that the foundations around it took damage, about 50 damage apiece. So the damage appears to be fairly consistent. A little bit more damage was done in this area, but the damage is very consistent in the pattern that it made here. So the landmine has a bit of a blast radius to it in terms of from testing we did, it's about one foundation to each side. So just keep that in mind. You'll notice again, it didn't trigger the other landmine there, but it's going to be something that you want to make note of, because if you're using it for base defensive purposes, it will damage things around you. The question that players are going to have is, because the landmine does have a blast radius and does damage foundations, is it going to damage items that are around it in terms of deployables? Let's go ahead and test that out and take a look. So you'll notice we had a chest here that actually did not take any damage, the furnace did not take damage, and the sleeping bag did not take damage as well, but the foundations most certainly did. So it's not going to damage deployables like sleeping bags, sleeping bags, chests, or furnaces, but it is going to damage the existing foundations, and that's something that you want to be aware of. And speaking of deployables and landmines, be aware that you can place deployable objects over landmines at this point in time to hide them. So notice we just put a sleeping bag on top of that landmine. The question now is, will that trigger the landmine if we walk on the sleeping bag? And yes, it most certainly will. So you can hide those landmines by using deployable objects. You can put them under chests and under sleeping bags. That's what we've tested out so far, and I imagine they can be placed under other deployables as well. So there's going to be interesting applications for the usage of landmines with base defenses. There's been some changes to fire in this week's iteration of Rust. If your player comes in contact with fire now, it's going to do more damage to a player and actually slow the player's movement speed for a length of time. In terms of the incendiary rockets, they now will create flames of differing sizes, so that's something that you want to be aware of. And the aesthetic of the metal armor has changed in this week's iteration of Rust. It looks a little more rustic in tone and a little more well-worn, if you will. It's really cool stuff, and I'm really digging it. It's not game-changing, it's not going to profoundly change the way the game is played, but it looks less shiny, and I think it fits better with the overall aesthetic of the game. This patch is bringing with it the next iteration of the procedurally generated terrain in Rust. It's going to have very slight differences, and you're going to notice variations in the rivers. They're going to be a little bit longer, wider in some instances, so a little more variation there. The transition between the biomes is going to be less pronounced, so that'll be something to be aware of. But the coolest thing is that the stars are going to be brighter in the sky, and then the moon as well is going to be much brighter, and we can see that in play here, the way it's shining off the water. So really neat stuff, and I'm really excited to see it in play. Overall, guys, this is a really awesome patch, and I really can't wait to see it in the wild tomorrow. As always, guys, really enjoyed making this video. Fado82, peace.